So let's start with last week's work. Last week's work asked you to look at a primary source and a secondary source, both generally about the same thing. I am making this video without having looked at your responses yet. Normally I do just the opposite, but I want to be able to say the things I'm saying now without it feeling to any of you like I'm pointing a finger at you. So know this, I have not read your submissions yet. I will be grading those the rest of today. This stuff I'm talking about now comes from previous semesters' experience with how students fail to take note of some important things. So none of this is directed at you, and all of it is something hopefully you can learn from. So the first thing we need to make sure we avoid is the simplistic read that would make us say, I don't know why you assigned us these two things together. They have nothing to do with each other. Because that is actually not true. They do have a great deal to do with each other. Both of them are looking at the ways that we can use algorithmic thinking in order to address an issue around education. Both of them are premised in the notion that students often feel driven in education and in other aspects of their life to get ahead by virtue of cheating. And both of them deal with how we deal with those things. So there's your quick overview of how they relate to one another. There's obviously more to that, and that's the big picture. The primary source in this case is our exam questions known in advance. Why is it a primary source? Because they did primary research. They did research that had not been done other places in order to understand something. Now, they called on secondary sources to defend why they would do that research. They called on other sources to defend how they understood the results of their research, but they did primary research, and that's why it's the primary source. The secondary source in this case is the chapter from Weapons of Math Destruction. So while she does draw on other pieces of information, she does not do any primary research herself, nor is she giving you a journalized version of what's happening firsthand in her life as she goes. So primary sources can be primary research, and it can also be things like primary documents, letters that are written that are looked at ex post facto from a historical perspective, journals that are written, maps that are created, etc. All that's primary. So in this case, we have a secondary source because she's talking about the things that she read or learned about. And she did not do any primary research. Weapons of Math Destruction is a popular source. It is not a scholarly source. It has not gone through peer review. Our exam questions known in advance has gone through peer review. It is an academic, scholarly, peer-reviewed source. These three modifiers, academic, scholarly, peer-reviewed, they're going to be the foundation of everything we do the entire rest of the semester. None of the things that you use for your research paper when you're answering your research question will be popular sources. We are strictly dealing with finding answers in academic, scholarly, peer-reviewed sources. So what does that mean? That means that a person who's an expert in the field, this is why we look up who they are, where they went to school, what their degree is in, and where they're currently working, writes a paper, submits it to an academic journal. The journal takes it blind, meaning they take the author's name and affiliation off, and sends it out to people who are also experts in that field with no name attached. Then those experts read the research and they determine whether or not it's too stupid for words. In essence, that's a slang way of saying it, but it happens. So no, we're not publishing this. Or it has some serious flaws that need to be addressed, and here they are. And it's submitted back to the author, who has a chance to amend those flaws and resubmit. Or, yes, this is generally not the truth, but in keeping with the standards of our understanding of our field, well enough that it warrants publication. Now, does that make it infallible? Absolutely not. But it does mean that it's got a few levels of care taken that stuff published in a magazine or in a newspaper or, God forbid, on a Facebook page simply do not have. So it's not that it's truth, it's that it's verifiable information to a greater degree than any other kind of information we have access to. So it's not meant to be, this is what is real, but rather, this is an integral part of a thoughtful conversation about an intellectual subject. Because a number of people have worked diligently to make sure that undue bias has been avoided. There's always going to be bias, but undue bias has been avoided. And due diligence has been done to verify information is as accurate as possible. The atom was the smallest thing till they blew it up and there was a bunch of stuff inside of it. So knowledge is perpetually conditional. It's never the case that you're going to go find the truth. It is the case that we have different levels of validity, that we can subject information to standards with which we understand that validity. So that's what academic, scholarly, peer-reviewed means. And you'll even learn with our librarian in a very short while how to make sure that you're limiting, even in your searches in the database, to make sure you're getting the kinds of information that we're privileging in this class, only because it's something that you've not yet learned. It's new learning. So as you were going through last week's work, you should have found things like, this author of Weapons of Math Destruction is an expert in her field, and the authors who are the authors of our exam questions known in advance are also experts in their field. Weapons of Math Destruction uses very different language from our exam questions known. And here's maybe why. Their audiences are different, and here's how their audiences are different and why that matters. Here's how the Weapons of Math Destruction article deals with cheating. Here's how our exam questions known deals with cheating as a construct. So all of those are things that might have shown up in your response from this previous week. It's really, really important. We started this past week, but now it'll become really important this week when we're reading 2 academic articles, that you make a clear distinction for yourself between what's the purpose of the research and what's the main idea of the article. So the purpose of the research for our exam questions known in advance was that these authors needed to find a way to ensure that the testing that they were using to allow students into medical school was as fair as possible in terms of cheating. That was their main purpose for writing the article and doing the research. Can we find a way to think about this, to build a system that will be as fair as possible? The main idea of their article is their conclusion, what they found. And that shows up on page 11 of 13. Here's the main idea in case you didn't get it for yourself. Make sure you go back and read for this main idea and see why it is I say this is true, or you're going to be kind of stuck when you head into the stuff you're reading for this weekend. Finding the main idea is the single most important thing that you will do as you're reading academic articles. So on page 11, they come to the conclusion in the third to the last paragraph, last sentence. Here's the main idea. Compromised items could then be excluded from scoring to neutralize the most likely cheating attempts. If that doesn't blow your mind, you didn't understand the article. So if you came away from this article thinking they're trying to punish cheaters, if you came away from this article thinking they're trying to devise a system that'll stop cheating, not true. If you came away thinking they're trying to make sure people can't cheat as they try to get into med school, not true. What they found as they came to the end of their research is that if they used an epidemiological model, now that word should be familiar to you because COVID is an epidemiological issue. If they used the same kinds of models they used for disease, they didn't have to build a cheat-proof test. They didn't have to design a system where cheaters are punished. They could look for hot spots, the way that we look for hot spots in terms of lots of people getting infected with the virus. They look for hot spots of where cheating looks like it might be likely on a question. Then they exclude that question altogether for everybody. They don't have to figure out who's cheating. They don't have to prove they're cheating. They don't have to build a cheat-proof test. They only have to say, this question looks like it might have been cheated on by a group of people. And so we remove that question for all people. That way, it's a fair bet for everyone. That is a fascinating conclusion to draw at the end of this research. And it looks at algorithms as the way to understand that epidemiological hotspot. So the things that you're headed into next. One is an article that is from the perspective of hard sciences. That makes me giggle because there's no such thing as hard sciences. Hard science is things like biology and forestry and I don't know why biology just keeps coming over and over again. And then we have the social sciences. That's the thing you just read, our exam questions known in advance. And hard sciences like to pretend that they're more rigorous than social sciences because they're not about human beings, and human beings are always messy and self-reporting is a problem. But the reality is hard sciences isn't any more accurate or valid than social sciences because things are always changing in our understanding of things like forestry and climate all the time. So I think we have to remember that all knowledge is partial because tomorrow things change in our understanding, not in necessarily the virus itself, but how we understand how it's spread. And we need to be ready to change with that. So it's not that there's no truth. It's that all truth is partial because we can only see from our one tiny perspective, which is constrained socially, constrained historically, constrained in terms of ignorance and understanding. All knowledge is partial. So as you read, keep in mind that hard sciences, something like massage, is going to be more concerned with numbers, with data, with what they consider hard proof. And the other article you're reading is a humanities article. It's going to be more concerned with lived experience and understanding human experience, even from an individual perspective. Social science is kind of an in-between, understanding the individual experience in a social context and using data and information to support that understanding. So you've got a lot to do this week, and it's going to be hopefully a lot of fun to do it, especially since you have a few new tools with which to think about what you're reading. Watch this video over and over again. Email me any questions you have. Your grades will start rolling out today. I should be done grading by the end of the day today, all of the things that you did this past Sunday. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully Friday morning in my office hours.